Hey, Nigel.
Hey there, Brucey. Oh, hey there, Bruce.
Welcome. It's so interesting. I have been near these mics hundreds of times. It still is a little strange for me to be literally sitting in Erlan's chair. And I should introduce myself since everybody knows who you are. Everybody might not know who I am. I'm Bruce Wallace, the executive producer. I started in early 2019.
Oh, my goodness. We're going on 5 years? Is my math correct?
I think that's right. Well, I think it was 5 years.
Well, it's been 5 years.
Yeah, 5 years in February.
Damn,
so 5.5 years.
Has it gone fast for you?
Well, those are such crazy years. Yes, but also when I think about like what happened in those 5 years, a lot has happened both sort of like in the scope of the show and in my own life.
That's true.
In those 5 years and in, the life of the world.
Yeah.
There was a pandemic. That was a big event.
I know.
I was thinking about when I started because we're here to talk about an episode that actually predated me, which is fun. It'll be fun to kind of revisit it or visit it for the first time with you. And so we're here to do this thing we were calling the Ear Hustle Sleeper Hits, I believe we're calling it.
Sounds good.
So it's basically the idea of, and I think it maybe is connected to us now being past 100 episodes and sort of being doing some kind of taking stock or looking back at things. And we're realizing that after 100 episodes, you've done a lot of stories, many of which really stand out and become listener favorites. Some maybe equally as good sort of fall through the cracks.
Yeah. And some we forget about.
Oh, totally.
It's amazing to me when I go back through our catalog. I'm like, whoa, we did that story?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And then each episode has, I don't know, between 1 and like 5 or 10 people. So there's so many people we've talked to over the course of those episodes. So the idea with the Sleeper Hits is that each person on Ear Hustle's staff has gone back, looked through our catalog, and thought, oh, that's an episode I really love, and either I forget about or I don't feel like doesn't get the love that it deserves.
Yeah, yeah.
So one at a time, starting with you, and then Erlan will be up next.
Yes.
We're going to revisit some of those episodes, some of these sleeper hits, ones which for various reasons haven't kind of risen to the best of list, but are really, special ones for members of the staff.
I love that we're doing this because I'm happy for listeners to hear behind the scenes of the things that we think about when we're putting an episode together. I always love behind the scene things to figure out how someone puzzles something together.
Totally.
And so it seems like a good opportunity.
We were actually just doing this with the team inside, looking at basically how we put together an episode that both you and I worked on. But it's really interesting. Even if you've worked on them, it's really interesting to go back and think, oh, why did we do that there? And then that's there. And why didn't we include this?
Yeah.
So this episode that you have chosen is from season 3.
I can't believe this is season 3. That is so long ago.
Just for reference, we just finished our 13th season. So this is 10 seasons ago.
And Erlan, I think, was still incarcerated when we did this episode.
Yeah, definitely, because I joined right when he got out, and I joined before season 4. So why don't you introduce us to this episode? And so the idea is we'll introduce it, we'll listen to the first half, and then you and I will pop back in and kind of talk about our impressions. Then we'll listen to the second half, more impressions.
That sounds great. So it was very hard for me to pick an episode. I think I had a final list of about 5. And I didn't re-listen to any of them. I just went with my memory. So I'm very curious to describe what this episode is and see if I'm actually right when we listen. Or I'm curious to talk about the reasons now that I selected it and see if they still hold up after we listen again.
Right.
So this is an episode about a place, about San Quentin as its own thing. And we're trying to explore if a place has a story just like a person has a story. And what I remember loving about this episode is all the different ways we got at doing that. And I thought at the time it was really a creative approach for us. And also for me personally, it brought together 2 really strong impulses I have and that have been part of all the work I do at San Quentin. The first is photography. And I haven't had much of an opportunity to bring those things together. The photography, that's been a huge part of my life, with the audio storytelling.
I had totally forgotten. Now I'm so curious to see how that plays out in this episode. I'd forgotten that was an element here.
Yep, it's a big element of the story. And then the second part is just storytelling in general. And I love to read. I love books, and books come into this episode. I think the sound design is really cool in this episode. it seems you could think it's all over the place, but it's really tied together with a very strong through line. I think that's how I remember it.
Okay.
Yeah. And also Sam is in it. I hope I'm right on this.
I was scanning through it earlier today and did happen upon his voice, so I can confirm that.
So it centers on San Quentin, it centers on photographs, and it also centers on a book that I think is really well written about San Quentin. It's called The San Quentin Story by Clinton T. Duffy, who was the warden, I think, in the 1950s. And there's some really cool passages from the book that are part of it. And it got us thinking about, wouldn't it be neat if sometime we actually recorded reading this book, and we're still trying to do that?
Yeah. Basically doing it like an audiobook version of this, and you'll sort of hear examples in here of what the whole thing could sound like.
Yeah. And let me just say my fantasy for that is if we ever get to do it, that we would have all different people reading from it. You know, people that are in San Quentin, people who work on the team here, people from CIW, people who have been in stories. I think it would be so cool to hear Warden Duffy's book, The San Quentin Story, read with, a dozen different voices.
All of whom have some connection to the place. Maybe it's very tenuous.
Exactly. And Warden T. Duffy actually started a radio program at San Quentin. So in some ways, and he was really a forward-thinking warden, and in some ways, Ear Hustle really calls back to the project that he wanted to do inside the prison. So I love that too.
God, I'm sure people have looked. There are no recordings of that, are there? That would be amazing.
I don't think so.
I wonder.
It would be amazing.
And I believe, I can't quite remember how it intersects with the history of the murals, but we did do an episode a few seasons ago about the murals that are in the Chow Hall at San Quentin. And I think maybe the contest to create those murals were started by him, but maybe the murals didn't happen under him.
Yeah, I think
There's
that's
something,
right.
It was like he was involved at the beginning, but not the whole way through.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of, this episode also kind of hints at the vagaries of storytelling, meaning that there's always so much happening below the surface. There's always so much subtext. And I think this episode kind of hints at that there's always more going on. And if you're a careful observer or listener, those things will bubble up to the top.
Yeah.
So I like that too about it. Boy, the more I talk about this episode, the closer I feel to it, like it's a friend.
I hope it doesn't stink.
I know.
That'd be awkward if we get halfway through.
There's friends that you kind of break up with, and then later on you think, why did I do that? And then you get back together with them and you're like, yeah, no, I did that.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Totally. Well, we will be honest when we come back at the mid-roll. If we're,
Yes.
One thing that, just before we hop in, that you saying this is unlike other episodes we do that are about particular people, here the central character is the place. That reminds me, that's how we were thinking, I think, of the 12 Hours on the Yard episode we did at the beginning of season 12, which was another totally different way to tell the story of this place where so many of our stories take place.
Exactly.
I wonder.
And in a completely different way.
Totally different way. Yeah, this one kind of jumps through time and space, and that one was like specifically all in 12 hours of one particular day. Maybe that's like, we can think of them as part 1 and 2.
Yeah, and I think those are both equally ambitious episodes.
Totally. All right, so let us listen to the first segment, the A-seg as we call it, of this place, episode 22 of Ear Hustle from October 10th, 2018 was when this was published.
2018?
That's right.
That almost seems like a generation ago.
Which also would have been a month or two, about a month and a half before Erlan got the news, right?
Wow, exactly. Things are about to really change.
I'm Tim Hicks, staff writer at San Quentin News. The following episode of Ear Hustle contains explicit language and graphic descriptions of violence that may not be appropriate for all listeners. Discretion is advised.
Now, as we walk down the ramp to the left, adjacent the imposing walls of San Quentin, imposing 20 to 30 feet high walls of San Quentin, opposite that is one of the oldest facilities we have on site here at this prison. And this building here, this granite gray building with this imposing gate in front of it, it's our dungeon. So everything think about dungeon, dark room, ball and chain, people hanging from walls and being tortured, took place in here from the inception all the way until 1943.
You're now tuned in to San Quentin's Ear Hustle from PRX's Radiotopia. I'm Earlonne Woods. I've been incarcerated for 21 years, and I'm currently housed here at San Quentin State Prison in California.
I'm Nigel Poor, a visual artist, now podcaster. I've been working with the guys here at San Quentin for about 7 years.
And together, we're going to take you on a tour.
Something different.
Indeed.
We house over 4,000 people behind our walls. When you house people in confined environment like we do here, things are subject to go askew. And that it's prison. So, there are bad things that take place inside these walls. And I don't throw that out there to scare you, but I do want to make you aware of the type of environment that you're walking into.
That's Lieutenant Sam Robinson, the public information officer here at San Quentin. He's the guy who has to approve this podcast to make sure that nothing in it is going to adversely affect the safety and security of the institution.
Lieutenant Robinson is also the guy who gives tours of the prison to outside groups.
That's right.
And he's done it hundreds upon hundreds of times. He got this shit memorized.
Oh, he does.
Down to a science.
When we walk inside of San Quentin, it's not like you're at the zoo, where the guys are on one side of the fence and on the opposite side. It's not like that. You're going to be immersed within our population. And so there are a couple things you need to be aware of. What does it mean? What do you think it means when I say that we have no hostage policy?
A few weeks ago, Lieutenant Robinson gave Ear Hustle a tour, and we got to see parts of the prison we'd never seen before.
It used to be this Victorian structure.
I've been all around this prison. All the ins, the outs, the nooks, the crannies, the cubby holes, and I thought I had seen it all, but I hadn't.
Well, my friend, there's a lot to cover here.
Yeah, 'cause San Quentin is hella old.
Oh, parts are really old. Some of it was built back in the 1850s.
And a lot of the history that Lieutenant Robinson likes to talk about, it was news to me.
Oh, so much I'd never heard before.
However, not only was it designed to house inmates, it was also designed to house the staff that works here at this prison. But initially...
Normally, we get guys inside to tell their stories.
But this place itself does speak, and it's not always through words.
Right.
I mean, there's a story everywhere you look.
If you know how to look.
Because there's no question in my mind that in the 165 years we've existed here, blood has been spilled just about every square inch of this place, lives have been lost, and our staff and our inmates tell these stories about these images they see floating through our housing units. It was just...
He was talking about ghosts there. Ghosts from San Quentin's past.
On this episode of Ear Hustle, we're trying something different. We're going to listen to some of those ghosts.
I saw them not as strangers or criminals or even numbers on a file card, but as human beings whose virtues and faults I knew better than anyone else, whose case histories I had studied for the parole board, whose wives and mothers and children I had known from many a tearful visit over the years.
Those are the words of Clinton T. Duffy from his book, The San Quentin Story. He's an interesting character.
Oh, yeah, he really is. He grew up here, his father was a guard, and Duffy himself became the warden in the 1940s. His book was published in 1950.
Talk about family business.
Mm-hmm.
Warden Duffy was a reformer. Some of his ideas were far ahead of his time.
I had known about the dungeons since childhood, for my father often talked to us about what he called the shame of San Quentin. But I had never seen this dreaded subterranean hole until the day I was sent there to interview the occupants for a census report.
So if we step inside, we have a series of 14 wells, and any of the guys in blue that make it down here to see it with me.
The dungeon was a black tunnel about 50 feet long, with 7 small cells on each side. The ancient mass of rock and concrete had the musty odor of a tomb. No sunlight had touched its moldy walls for almost 90 years, and the foul air had no place to go, for there were no windows and the cell doors were hand-forged iron.
6 feet wide and maybe about 14 feet deep. Each of these wells Today it doesn't have it, but when we operate the dungeon, each of them had big solid doors in front of them. And so no matter what perspective you're in, you're securely locked away in the dark. In each room, we give 3 conveniences, which are 3 buckets, 1 with water and 2 that were empty. And over the course of a minimum of 3 days, they'd have to navigate that in the dark amongst themselves. And there are things that are embedded.
Each cell was nothing more than a niche cut into the stone, and the walls and floor were bare. There was no light, no bed, no ventilation, no toilet facilities, not even a bench. There was sometimes 3 or 4 men in one cell, and there was no place to sit except a triangular block of concrete in one corner.
Well, after 3 days, we'd come back over, we'd reassess a guy. If he had learned his lesson, we didn't think he was a knucklehead anymore or anything like that, we'd let him back out in prison. If we still thought he was a knucklehead, then we kind of changed the dynamics. And there are things that are embedded in top of the wells. We'd string guys up, leave them hanging for days on end, we'd beat them and torture them. There were actually instruments of torture designed here at San Quentin to predict the behavior of people we locked away in these wells.
Prisoners slept on the damp floor with 1 blanket, if they were lucky, and they got bread and water at the whim of the guards. I had to use a flashlight to take my notes, and for weeks afterward, I was haunted by the memory of the shrunken faces I saw in the dim light, the smell of the living dead, the drip of moisture from the vaulted ceiling.
Well, in 1943, Warden Clinton Duffy, who was newly appointed warden here at San Quentin, made the decision that torture wasn't necessarily the best way to go about things. So we had all the doors removed from the dungeon with the thought it would have made it difficult for anyone to come along after him to reopen and utilize for those purposes. And we haven't utilized the dungeon since.
Centralized in the frame is a blood spatter that looks like there's been things drugged through it, probably someone's body. And then there's this crudely drawn chalk outline. It was drawn very poorly. Like they literally just like outlined the body and then drug it out of the way and then took the picture.
Lieutenant Robinson gives a great tour, but photos, Nige, are another window into the past. That's your lane.
Yep, I'm a photographer. And about 5 years ago, I was in Lieutenant Robinson's office, and he pulled out this box full of hundreds and hundreds of 4x5 negatives, and that really caught my attention. Over the past several years, I've been archiving them, and I started a project that actually predates this podcast, bringing these pictures into the prison to see what guys would make of them.
It looks like it might be on a stone floor. It looks like it's on a tier because I see part of a staircase.
That's Mesro. He's been on the podcast before talking about Dungeons and Dragons.
I don't know. Whoever's standing there has got shiny black shoes.
It's hard to tell exactly what is going on in many of these photographs, but we do know the dates of most of them and that they were taken by COs.
The photo Mesro is holding looks to be a murder scene. It was taken inside San Quentin in 1965.
And then it's like the blood is like spattered. There's like this smear that's in the middle that makes me know that maybe the bulk of his body was probably drugged through his own blood in order to get him out of the way. The fact that somebody took the trouble to trace this thing out and then turn around and add an insult to injury and did it kind of terribly, right? It sticks in my craw a bit.
These photos, they're just amazing. And because they're mysterious, they make you look even more closely for clues. When I asked the guys to look at them, I wanted the images to be prompts to help them access their own memories. The photo of blood inside a chalk outline brought up memories for Mesro. Now, can you tell me a story based on looking at this image?
So I used to hang out with this white guy named Shred. I never knew his real name, and he was kind of like a skinhead variant, I guess. I'm not really up on the gang things and the stuff with the Aryan Brotherhoods and all that, but he had a lot of Norse stuff tattooed on him and iron crosses and like that. Shred was hysterical. He was one of the funniest guys I've ever met. He had jokes all day long. And so despite what people would think about, whatever racism or policy or whatever that is, like we always used to meet up with each other going to and from chow when we were in reception. And we'd always be cracking these jokes and talking crazy to people and, and just laughing. And, you know what I'm saying? He was a really cool guy. And one day we were coming back from dinner. He saw someone and he started screaming out, 88, 88. And he like rushed this guy, pulled out a couple of box cutters and like cut this guy to ribbons, like right in front of the cops and God and everybody. And it was a very horrific thing to see someone get sliced up with a bunch of box cutters. His face was turned towards me with his dead eyes, right? They hadn't closed his eyes. And so it's like, in my eyes, it felt like he looked at me like, why didn't you stop him from killing me? And there was really nothing I could do, right? It was so sudden. I still have dreams about that sometimes.
Were you surprised that your friend did that?
I was, because, even though we had spent like a lot of time cracking jokes and stuff, we hadn't really, I didn't really know that guy, I mean, like his name, Shred, was kind of a giveaway, but like some people take on names that don't really fit like who they are or what they do. So I just thought it was, personally, I just thought it was a cool name. So I was like, okay, Shred, that's a cool name, right? I didn't realize that his name was Shred because he shredded people.
And so I'll tell you, the reason why I stopped here, and it always humbles me when I stop at the outdoor restroom facilities here in the prison, and I stop here for a reason, because there's a story I always stop and just kind of hone people into. In that, when I was a brand new cop and I worked on death row, I remember many days in the mornings we served their meals inside their cells, and if you're the second cop feeding breakfast in the morning, you would pour a beverage. And so whether the beverage was coffee that was hot or tea, and every once in a while they'd get a juice like an orange juice or a cranberry juice or whatever the case may be. And so whenever we served cold beverages, I remember it like it was yesterday, many of the guys in there have tumblers with lids on it. And if they got a cold beverage, and if they hadn't consumed their beverage when you would come back to them to take them out to yard, and when you take them out to yard, you got to do this unclosed body search on them inside their cells, all that, go through all their stuff. Many times what I would witness is the guys would take their tumbler, if they hadn't drank their beverage entirely, they would put the lid on the tumbler, and they would walk it over, and they would drop it in the toilet. And as a new cop, the first time I saw it, it blew my mind. I just didn't know. I didn't understand what was going on, because I'm the type of guy, I'll clean my toilet, but never ever would I consume anything that comes out of my toilet, right? It's just not what you do. And so after I got a little more comfortable working in the environment, I remember I asked a guy, I say, hey man, look, I say, why are you putting your beverage in the toilet? I say, that's just not what normal people do. And he said, Robinson, he said, look, he said, if I leave my cup out here on the shelf, he say, when I come back 4 hours later to a warm beverage. He say, if I put it in the toilet, that toilet water is cold, and it acts as a refrigerator. So when I come back to a cold beverage. And so the tight confinement, toilets as refrigerators, it just really, really honed my mind into thinking that I didn't ever want to do anything in life where I put myself in a situation where I ended up being incarcerated in prison.
It seems to me that I have been acutely aware of San Quentin's condemned row, like a sore that refuses to heal, as far back as I can remember. It probably began in the little San Quentin schoolhouse, where an eccentric teacher named Miss Redmond took a sadistic pleasure in arousing her pupils to the horror of the gallows. On execution morning, she was pale and tremulous, and would usually make the grave announcement that a man was about to be hanged. In the building right over there, she would hiss ominously, pointing to the brick furniture factory. Just think of it, children, that poor man. It was never news to us, of course. Every San Quentin youngster knew the meaning of the deathly stillness that fell upon prison town on those gloomy Friday mornings. Those of us whose fathers were assigned to duty in or around the gallows building were especially disturbed, and even under ordinary conditions, we would have found it difficult to concentrate on our schoolwork. But Miss Redmond wasn't satisfied with that. Shortly before 10 o'clock, as the death march began, she would put down her book and say, "Oh, children, that poor man has only 15 more minutes to live." She had an old-fashioned pocket watch on her desk, and sometimes I can still hear it ticking away in that hushed room. "Now it's only 10 minutes, she would whisper. She had learned somewhere that it took between 10 and 15 minutes for a man to die on the rope, and she had it timed in her own mind until at last she could groan, "There, it's done. He's dying. Dying." And while a man was dying and a woman with a twisted mind extracted a perverted pleasure from it, 15 or 20 small boys and girls were being scarred with psychological wounds that few of them ever forgot.
My name is John Robb, and my CDC number is C44202. I was here in 77, 78, 79.
So tell me, what's your first memory of stepping inside San Quentin in 1977?
I'm at the end of the world. Life as I knew it before was over, and I'm going to die here.
And were you on the main line?
No, I was on the row. I was sentenced to death originally. I remember having to go to South Block Hospital, and there's like 8 guards that take you down the elevator, and you can never get over that dead man walking, because they would scream that out. And, you know, dead man walking, like right now they'll say escort. Well, they used to say dead man walking. And as I'm shackled, you know, with my leg chains and my waist chains and stuff, and I'm going to the hospital, they would say that.
Who would yell that, dead man walking?
The officer, whatever one that was ahead, to let other people know that there was a dead man walking, stay out of the way.
I didn't know that was real. I thought that was just
in movies. Oh, that was
movies.
Very real. I still hear it in my head. And that's the way you're treated. You're dead. Well, I'm looking at a medical staff, probably a doctor, and there's an inmate that's holding a black cap close to his chest, and there's a doctor there with a stethoscope that's listening to the cat's heart. The cat's all wide-eyed and everything, and yeah, that's a strong memory for me right there on that. I raised a cat in West Block. They allowed me to do that.
How'd you get a cat?
I was in maintenance. I worked maintenance a lot. In the maintenance, there was a pit. I stepped down in it, up to my chest. I'm in it, and there's a pipe going through the ground. And I kept hearing this screaming, like a little cat, little something. So I got in this hole, and I reached in there, and there's a bunch of fur all torn up. But here's this little tiny baby cat. Didn't even have his eyes open, and I stuck him in my pocket, and I took him home, and I got a little barrel off of Binky, you know, and stuff to feed it. I, you know, cleaned it, and I fed it. It liked powdered egg mix, you know, so, and I mixed that. Oh, he was hooked on that. He'd be quiet. I had to get up like every so many hours. I'm going, dude, what are you screaming for? You're waking up everybody. And then I would feed him. And it just got to be a regular habit because he was my buddy. You know, I think that's pretty much why they let me have him, because it kept me mellow. I had something to go back to in my cell.
All right, so as we stepped inside the facility, I think the first thing your eyes are attracted to are the fronts of the cells, because they're all darkened with this black mesh in front of it. Well, that black mesh is there for a purpose. In the movies and in prisons, you'll see open bars where guys are able to reach out through the bars and grab or throw or whatever the case may be. And in 1985, the last murder of an employee here at San Quentin took place, not with an inmate that was out walking around them and stabbing the employee, but the inmate was actually inside of his cell. And he was inside of his cell. He manufactured a spear inside of his cell, and as the employee walked past the cell, he lunged the spear through cell bars and murdered our employee. So after that, we went on a building spree to protect our employees, and in front of all of our cell bars, we designed this wire mesh fronts to prevent guys from spearing our staff inside the cells.
It looks like metal frames, a bunch of little metal square frames, and then the inside of these square frames are small pieces of glass, and there's one glass that looks like it has a hole in the middle where it looked like a rock or something has been broke, and you have a hand pointing at the hole inside of the glass.
It's weird, right?
Yeah, it's strange.
So why do you think that picture was taken?
I don't know why it was taken. It actually, to be honest with you, if this is a prison, I do know why it was taken, because people can take a piece of this glass and use it as a weapon, you know. So the picture was taken so that it'll be identified that this particular glass is broke in this particular area.
Oh God, how many weapons could be made out of that broken pane of glass?
Oh, I'll say about 10, maybe 20, depending on how small you cut the knives. And so it reminds me of a story. Mm-hmm. Right? So my first time in prison, I went through Tracy, which Tracy is a reception center, right? Everybody go through the reception center. So I went through Tracy during a period where it was the summertime. It was very hot.
Like how hot?
Oh, Tracy gets it gets over 100 degrees in that area, right? So there's no ventilation in these cells. You know, it's an old prison. Tracy's an old institution. So a lot of people, you know, break the windows just so they can get air and not necessarily for a weapon.
So do you almost feel like you can't breathe? It's so hot?
Yeah, it's really hot. It's very hot. People lay on their bunks with just their underwear on and don't move.
And so when you break a window, what changes in the cell?
You can get some type of air. I wouldn't say much, but any air in that situation is good. So you can hear people yelling across to the other building when they hear somebody break a window. Break another one, brother. You hear that all day long. Break another window, brother. And everybody go through Tracy know that term. Break a window, brother. Break another one, brother.
If I knew why certain men, especially those who haven't much time to serve, will suddenly jeopardize their whole prison record and risk an added 5-year penalty for a few hours or days of uneasy freedom, I would certainly do something about it. For want of a better name, we call this affliction paroleitis, and occasionally an intelligent man recognizes the symptoms and begs us to keep a close watch on him until his parole day. But most of them do not understand their deeply buried motives, and the remorse of a man who realizes he has double-crossed himself, not us, is a painful thing to see.
I'm looking at a picture. It looks like training photo for people that escaped. It's probably the back of a truck. There's a bunch of boxes of cans that are empty. They're tomato cans, and inside these tomato cans is a cleared out space where it looks like an inmate sitting to escape. And I've known a few people that escaped from there.
You do?
Yes.
Oh, can you tell?
Well, there's one dude named Red. I'm not going to use his real name because he ended up getting killed here. But Red escaped in a truck kind of like this, just like this. And when he escaped, he hit the bay. He hit the water too soon. And it was at night because he got out of the truck and he was hanging out. And then got dark and he hit the bay. Well, this is the Alaskan Gulf water. This ain't the Caribbean water. So he hit the bay and he started freezing and he got out. And the tower that's out in the back entrance tower, the cop was asleep and Red leaned against the fence and hypothermia was setting in and he was shaking so bad that he rattled the fence enough to where it woke the cop up, and that's how he got caught.
We'll be right back after the break.
Wow, there's a lot there.
I know. I have a lot of notes, and I saw it was nice to listen to it with you, because both I saw you taking a lot of notes, but also when you heard each voice, you're like, oh, you sort of smiled here, remembering, this person was in there.
I love that. That was really did come to me, how many familiar voices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I even recognize most of them. Before we kind of like walk through beat by beat your impressions, what's your overall kind of sense for it? And did it live up to the expectations you had going in?
It did. I was very excited listening to it. I think what hit me, one of the first things that hit me was, I love that old opening music. I still get chills when I hear the opening original Ear Hustle theme.
Yeah.
It just tells you something surprising and exciting is coming your way. So it always got me hyped up to hear an Ear Hustle story. What I love is the way with the book, starting with the tour and then the book and the photographs, we just dump listeners in there without really holding their hand.
Yeah.
And so you don't really know what's happening. But I think pretty quickly you can pick up the clues. And so it could be disorienting, but my hope is it's not. Like it's disorienting enough that it keeps you interested but doesn't alienate you.
Totally.
That's what came across.
Do you know Les Blank, the filmmaker? It made me think, when I first saw his films, because they're all about such fascinating subjects, there were times, because it's not like he has a through line, they're more of like, I feel like a composite that conveys an emotion or feeling or a sense.
Yeah.
At first, I was like, I don't think I like these, because I want to know about, like, why did Lightning Hopkins, when was he born, like the traditional documentary stuff.
Exactly.
But then at some point I watched them again, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, it's like through all these sort of like collages, or this like collage of sensory experience, you sort of like feel the place.
Yeah.
Which is really what, going from, Warden Duffy talking about this insane teacher. Maybe not insane. I don't know. Maybe it was a good lesson for these kids to take on. But yes, they must be haunted. Yeah, just sort of like going from that to like Sam on the tour, and then these sort of like unpacking, photo mapping the photos. You really, in composite, even though you don't get a sense of like, in 1935 this happened, you get a real feel for the place, like a three-dimensional feel.
Yeah, and I love how the past and the present are speaking to each other.
Yeah.
And I'm amazed at how the photographs tie in so well with the book. And I was trying to remember the process, and I think this is what happened, was we did the photographs. The guys were just given a selection of photographs, and they could pick, say, from 5 to 10 photographs, the one they wanted to talk about. So we had no control over that. So then they would talk about the photographs. And then I think as I was reading the book, I kept track of passages that would work well off their description of a photograph.
I see.
And it's amazing how well they connect.
So the idea was always to do an episode that combined the photo mapping project, or the San Quentin Archives project, with passages from the book.
Yeah.
But it was the photographs that were chosen first, and then you sort of found passages that fit it.
Yes, because we didn't tell the guys what to write about or what to pick. So that part was up to chance. And then it's amazing how many things crossed over to the book. I think a lot of times with really great stories, there is a trust in the serendipity, or the the chance of something coming together. And this episode really highlights how that can happen.
Yeah. And I do love, I mean, I have to work against the sort of like my instincts to be like, this happened, and then here's the next thing, and here's the reason we're going to the next thing.
Yeah.
But I love when we have episodes where the connection between one piece and the next piece is implied, if it's there at all. It's just like very abstract.
Yeah. So far, this holds up for me.
What are your other notes?
Okay, so we've done the tour, the San Quentin tour. Of course, not all our listeners have. And I like how it starts with the tour, and it's a little eerie when Sam talks about, well, before it gets eerie, he talks about how you're going to be immersed in the population.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's what Ear Hustle's directive is to immerse you in a population. So I thought that was neat. But then he brings up the no hostage policy.
He always brings that up. What is, I mean, I've seen him, in fact, the only time I did the tour was the last tour he gave, and it was mostly, he let me tag along to one that he was mostly giving, I think, to like high school students. And I remember he really hammed that up. And at that point, I thought it was just sort of like to amp up the spookiness.
I think so. When you said ham it up, I think that's it. It's like theater.
Yeah. Although I guess does he probably have to say that like by regulation?
Yeah. It is true. There is a no hostage policy, so if people understand, that means that they will not trade you. You basically are signing something that said, if something goes down, there's no guarantee you're going to get out.
Yeah.
There's never been a hostage situation since I've been there. I don't know when the last one was, but I do think there is a little theater behind it.
Totally.
Yeah. And people do get kind of chills. I remember getting a little bit of chills when I heard that the first time.
It is interesting that, like, the way it happens in the episode, I think is pretty like it happens in his tour, that the dungeon is one of your first stops. And it reminded me that is basically as soon as, like, when we're going in every time, we pass that dungeon kind of first thing.
Yeah.
We pass the chapel and lots of flowers, but then we walk by the dungeon. So that sort of like, there are lots of places of dark history in there, but like that dark history is part of our going and coming every time.
And until you go in there and until you read Warden Duffy's book, you don't realize how grim it is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's just it's a door with a metal grate over it, and if you look in, you can see it goes into a dark space, but you don't realize how horrible it is. Really, I think Warden Duffy's book brings it into full view. And I like in the beginning of the book, he talks about the shame of San Quentin.
Yeah.
That really hit me, and how he wasn't trying to hide the things about San Quentin that were really reprehensible.
Yeah.
Like that and the teacher. So he's not talking about it for thrills. It just sounds like it was a god-awful place, so inhuman.
And I was shocked. Maybe Sam said this when I went on the tour. I imagine he did, but I didn't realize they were active until the 1940s. I would have guessed they feel like 19th century, like, San Quentin was built in 56 or something. Is that right? I would just have assumed, okay, it was like maybe the 1850s through the 90s or something, but 1943, that it was a long time ago, but not
that long.
Yeah.
It's also interesting when Sam does the tour, he always says we, even though he's talking about far in the past.
Yeah.
So for a minute you think, oh, they're still using this. But
right.
No, he's talking about the 40s.
Yeah, that is interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
So he's like a real ownership. And the other thing, I loved hearing all the different voices, and they all have such distinct sounding voices, Mesro and John, and then the guy who talked about the escape. They all have beautiful voices that hold your attention, and they're such good storytellers.
Yeah. I wonder how much of that was the photo, like how much of that was sort of the structure that you'd set up, that they were sort of focused on a story, but I don't know.
As I was listening, I was thinking, if I had to look at one of those photographs and come up with a story, I don't think it would ever make its way into a podcast. It would get edited out. So
yeah. And I bet I wonder if listeners can picture the pictures they're talking about. Although sometimes it's not necessary, right? Because it's more about like, what does it spur in you?
I wondered, because I could picture them really clearly. I know them so well. And as they were describing them, it was like coming into complete visual focus in my mind, almost as if it was being drawn. I could see it. So I'm curious what listeners experienced of those photographs. Like when John, the one who's talking about the cat, he starts out, he's so gruff, and you can tell he's this big guy, and then when he's like,
well, he's the one
teeny tiny cat.
He starts talking about being on death row, right?
Yes.
And then that's a story arc from his sort of like memory of death row to capturing or saving this cat.
Putting it in his pocket. Oh, and Bonaru. How could I forget Bonaru?
I know, but at first, I was like, oh, that must be Bonaru, who was featured, I'm sure, in several episodes, but including the one we called Tax is Tripping, because his nickname is from the subject of that episode, which was, how do you become Bonaru in prison?
Yeah. But I always think him saying, break another window, brother, break another window.
I know, I'd totally forgotten that. I love that seeing a shard or whatever of glass missing from a window brought back that memory.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I mean, how else would you have gotten to that? Maybe you could have said, like, where did you start out? And does anything stand out about? But yeah.
Yeah. I also like when he starts talking about the window and he says, I don't know why they would take a picture. And he's like, yeah, I actually do know why.
That's right.
So, there's always the story and then the real story when it comes to prison things. And he decides to tell the real story. And I also like how we go from talking about the broken glass as a weapon to the broken glass is like giving people air and almost life in a way.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I did want to point out that the voice we hear reading so expertly from Duffy's history biography, history of the prison, is Lee Jasper, right?
Yes, the musician.
Yeah, whose music people have heard a lot. I mean, he's sort of been, he generally works right next door to us at San Quentin, so if he hasn't been in that many episodes, he's definitely always been a presence.
You hear him.
Yeah.
And he's got a great voice. I remember there was a time we were talking about if we could actually record different books, we would have Jasper read. He has the perfect book reading voice. And especially at that time, you feel like you're hearing somebody from the 50s.
Oh, yeah, it does. It feels very historically appropriate.
I can't get over that teacher, though. She's a freak.
Crazy, right? Also, I didn't...
Children.
Yeah, I didn't realize there was ever... She said like a San Quentin schoolhouse, right? So kids, presumably children of staff, but they're going to school... Either not in the prison, but probably right adjacent to it.
Yeah, there's a photograph from the archive of the San Quentin school, and there's probably like 40 kids. It looked like it was like a one-room school, schoolhouse. So there must have been all different ages together. There's not enough for more than like a class.
Gosh, what a eerie location for the school.
Yeah. I love the sound design in this.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Really great. It's so sculpted, and there's the recurring sound of the paper, the photographs moving, so that signals to you that you're going to a photograph. There's a similar kind of music before we hear the book being read. Yeah. So is that called signposting?
I mean, we normally use it in terms of narrative signposting, but that's definitely signaling.
Yeah.
We still use that song. That song is very useful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think actually the sound design is often doing the transition work, particularly because when we're in this space of like, they don't need to be clear and specific. They can be sort of abstract transitions. Then sound design can do that.
I wonder if this is the kind of episode that needs more sound design than other ones we do. It seems so essential to making this work.
Yeah.
But I love how it holds, like you really feel it wrapping around scenes and creating passageways for you to walk down and like walls that you're going to hit. Yeah, it's great.
And none of it, I mean, there was like keys.
Yeah.
But all the literal stuff, and none of it felt too literal, like you could have seen like the dungeon being very kind of gothic and like macabre or something, like overdone, but it wasn't, we didn't do any of that.
No, well done, sound design.
I also noticed that this is obviously pre-Amy, our current editor, her pause patrol.
Oh,
there's sometimes I think, this could have been slowed down a bit.
Definitely.
But
definitely.
I try not to focus too much on those little like obnoxious tiny production things.
I definitely heard some pause patrol. I love the sound design, and I definitely heard some edits. I wasn't sure. I love Sam, but I wasn't sure about that story with the putting the drinks in the toilet. That felt a little long to me.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I'm not quite sure what it was setting up, except that you would never want to come to prison. You would never want to do anything to get to prison.
Yeah, but it didn't actually speak to the theme.
No.
I was appreciating it just because it felt so typical and common, but it's also, I feel like, something we've heard before.
Yeah, so I know it was back in season 3, so it was a while ago, but I'm curious what the thought process was about keeping it in there.
It might have just been one of those pieces of tape that somebody really loved and wanted to keep in, despite all arguments. Okay, so we now are actually going to take a break as previously advertised. Then we'll come back. We'll hear the second segment, and then we'll kind of do a wrap up.
Sounds good.
I see two people that are very in love. They're deep in a kiss. This man has his hand around her shoulder, around the back of her neck. She's holding his chin while they're kissing with their eyes closed.
The kiss is really potent, isn't it?
Yeah, they seem like they're really deep in love.
And that they don't care that someone's photographing them.
They're so relaxed. They're just into it, you know?
So what does the picture make you think about?
It reminds me of a picture that I took with my first and only, so far, my only love, the only girl I ever fell in love with. We were, I believe, 16. We were just crazy in love. The setting, the way they're kissing, the arm placement, the hand placement, everything is exactly the same. My hand was on my knee, her hand was on my chin, my arm was around her, our eyes were closed, our mouths were together. I just remember feeling so like it just felt so right. You know, I felt so relaxed. I felt so in love. I felt like I just wanted to be lost in that moment right there forever.
And what happened to that love?
A few years later, I ended up getting in trouble as an adult, and I went to jail, and I ended up catching a 10-year prison sentence. Being that I'm going to go away for 10 years, that I couldn't just sit here and hold her down, you know, so I told her to just move on. It wasn't for 7 years until I actually reconnected with her on a prison payphone. When I called her on the prison payphone here, you only have 15 minutes. I remember thinking there's so much I want to say, but I can't say it all in 15 minutes. What am I going to do? When I was talking to her on the phone, I was still in prison, but mentally, I was either 15 or 16 years old, and I was everywhere we were back then. I was hanging out at parks, meeting her friends, and camping, and renting out hotel rooms behind her mom's back, and sneaking into her room, and so it really took me to a whole nother place. The last thing that I heard her say on the phone was, "Take care and be safe." And then the phone went dead, really. I got up and I look around and I'm back in prison again, and a bunch of crazy people around me yelling and screaming and doing what they do, and I wanted to go back to my cell, and I just wanted to cry, really. But I held it in, and I ended up just writing a song.
I dream of you like it was yesterday, lost in a moment forever. Your hazel eyes are like the stars in the sky, or summer sunrise on a lake. You in my arms left me frozen in time. Everything else went away. Right then I know it would always be you, and I wish that I could just stay that moment forever. In that moment forever.
All right, folks. Well, this is where I get to get off the tour train with you, but hopefully during time we spent with each other today, hopefully I was able to enrich your thoughts about what we do behind the walls of places like this every day. Thank you, guys.
Whoa, no. That was great. Well, so what part of the prison do you like talking about the most when you do a tour?
I'll tell you this. I I remember looking from a very, very hard and difficult environment, looking out of the windows of the adjustment center and seeing volunteers come into the prison and not understanding what that was about. Because the guys I was dealing with would kill you if you gave them the opportunity, or if you slipped up or made a mistake. And you'd see the people who were moving around freely, that these people were engaging with them differently. And I didn't understand it. I didn't internalize it that the guys outside were any different than the guys inside, that they were in a different place. And just being in there and being in the adjustment center, I think I learned what prison potentially is about. And just because a day is difficult, just because a guy is giving you a hard time, just because you got to go in and you have to be physical with a guy, it could be not that it's personal, but it's just the business of the day. It's not just a dislike for you. It's just what they have to do to get across a point. And I think that's where I truly learned to take a man where he is at that day or at that point in time and take him for who he is then, because 15 minutes from now, it can be something that's completely different. The next day, it can be completely different. And that could be for better or for worse.
Thanks to Lieutenant Sam Robinson for giving us that tour of San Quentin. There's so much he said that we couldn't squeeze into this episode, but maybe we'll hear more from that tour another time.
Thanks to Gregg Sayers for talking with us and singing that song.
Thanks to Norman Willhoite for his escape story, and to Bonaru for looking at that picture of the broken window with me.
And thanks to John, Robb, and John's cat.
That was so cute.
John, you lucky, because they don't allow cats in here. I've never seen one in San Quentin.
Big thanks to Mesro for sharing his story about Shred.
Lee Jasper was the man behind that wonderful voice reading excerpts from Warden Duffy's book, The San Quentin Story. It's not in print anymore, but you can find old copies online.
And speaking of Warden Duffy, Earlonne, I know he's been dead a long time, but we owe him a lot.
Real talk. Warden Duffy was ear hustling long before us. Check this out.
I wanted to tell the people what we were doing, and I got the brash notion that if we had an all-inmate package show, to use the trade term, we might get it on the air. An inmate rounded up 30 men who were interested in choral work and started a glee club. We rehearsed the singers with the orchestra for 2 or 3 weeks and then recorded a sample program. I put the platter in my briefcase and went to see the manager of one of the most powerful stations in San Francisco. I told him what I wanted and offered to play the record. "A bunch of cons on the air?" he bellowed. "I should say not. You must want me to get fired." I went to another station a few blocks away. The manager there was polite and friendly, but he said he couldn't use our show even if we had Humphrey Bogart in the cast. I tried 2 more downtown stations, but they didn't want any part of San Quentin. By this time, my ardor had cooled considerably, but I was willing to try one more, KFRC, mainly because I had to pass the station on my way out Van Ness Avenue toward the Golden Gate Bridge. To my surprise, the manager, Bill Papps, listened to me eagerly and said he thought it was a unique and intriguing idea. San Quentin on the Air, as our show was called, made its debut from the small mess hall in the prison on January 12, 1942. I felt that with the magic of radio, we had penetrated the invisible wall. In a matter of weeks, San Quentin on the Air spread to more than 300 stations coast to coast, and the San Quentin post office staff floundered in a sea of some 4,000 fan letters a week.
4,000 letters a week? Damn, we don't even get that many.
Okay, no we don't. But we do get emails and we get comments on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all of that stuff.
We appreciate that, for sure.
You can see images from the San Quentin archive, including the ones guys talked about in this episode, on our website, earhustlesq.com. Just go to the gallery page.
And if you want to know more about the photo project Nige mentioned at the top of the show and you happen to live in Milwaukee, check out her exhibit at the Milwaukee Art Museum. It's called Nigel Poor and the Men of San Quentin. It's up until March of 2019.
Ear Hustle is produced by myself, Nigel Poor.
And me, Earlonne Woods.
With help from outside producer Pat Mesiti-Miller, who also comes in to work with our sound design team. This episode includes music from David Jossi and Antoine Williams.
Curtis Fox is our story editor, Aaron Wade's our digital producer, and Julie Shapiro is our executive producer for Radiotopia. We want to thank Warden Ron Davis, and as you know, every episode has to be approved by this guy here.
Again?
Yes, it is me again. This is Lieutenant Sam Robinson, the Public Information Officer at San Quentin State Prison. It is easy for me. This is the first one that's truly easy for me to say I approve this episode.
Next time on Ear Hustle, it's our Catch a Kite Q&A episode,
where we answer questions from listeners, and this time we really mean straight from the listeners.
I am a formerly incarcerated woman. My question for y'all is this. What is the one misconception about prisoners and or prison that you wish the greater public did not hold?
Ear Hustle is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX, a collection of the best podcasts around. Hear more at radiotopia.fm. This podcast was made possible with support from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, working to redesign the justice system by building power and opportunity for communities impacted by incarceration. I'm Earlonne Woods.
And I'm Nigel Poor. Thanks for listening.
Ear hustling.
No Easter egg. Because it's pre-Bruce.
And also that fade at the end was a little too tight.
Yeah, I could definitely hear some edits there. Plus, I thought we always said thanks for listening together. I wonder when that started.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. A question where the mid-roll was put.
Yeah, I wonder. It was different. I can't quite remember, but I think when we used to do count time, I also don't know when we stopped doing that, but I thought we sort of went somewhere, we went to a break and then came back and there was just like a real quick sort of unrelated thing at the end. So this kind of had that feel, even though it wasn't called count time. It did have a feeling of like, and here's one more thing.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously he was doing the photo project, but it was so interesting. The other ones really had the effect of kind of like grounding you in the place. And that one really, I mean, even says like it takes you out of the place. It sort of like levitated out of the prison.
And it's the one I forgot about. What I liked when I recognized Gregg's voice, he's so soft and dreamy when he's telling that story. And it really, he brings that energy, really makes you feel like a teenager again and all that like crazy pent up romantic energy that you have. Other thing I thought about was the 15-minute phone call used to be such a big deal for people inside.
Right.
And for us, like conceptually thinking about that and the way you would just get cut off from a phone call. And now with the tablets, that doesn't happen.
Right.
You can talk, I think you can talk longer and you just call people right back. And I 100% forgot about that song.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, he's really good. We've had his music in a couple episodes.
I feel like we've thought about catching up with him now that he's out to do another music episode.
I'd love to hear what he's doing. The thing I noticed I really liked how his song just kind of ends and then you're brought right back into the prison and it mirrors that feeling that he had on the phone, like he's outside of the prison and then the phone just clicks off and the song ends kind of abruptly and then I think we go right to Sam talking about
wrapping up the tour.
Yeah, so I thought that worked pretty nicely.
Yeah.
And I was glad to have the Warden Duffy part come back in again. And that just seemed so much like Ear Hustle to me. Like
I know. I feel like you and I were both like, what this is like. Yeah, in terms of sort of like, well, what are the ways that you...
Well, I was like, he was tenacious. He wasn't going to give up. He had this idea, which is very akin to Earlonne and myself with Ear Hustle. Like, we just had this idea and we were going to make it work. And all the no's he got. And then finally somebody says yes, and it's just a hit. I mean, 4,000 letters a week? Is that what he said?
Yeah, 4,000 a week.
That's incredible.
San Quentin on the air. And it felt like even the impulse was similar. Like, let's bring the inside out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Make the wall lower. I think he even says that somewhere in the book.
Wow.
Make the wall transparent.
Yeah, there's just so much of that. There was like, wow, Warden Duffy sort of things that he was up to in the 40s feel very contemporary.
Totally.
Including San Quentin on the air.
Yeah.
Feels like Ear Hustle philosophically.
Totally.
But also like this, all the conversation about San Quentin Rehabilitation Center, you know, that project of like getting a glee club together and then like showing people on the outside what people are doing inside. That feels like things that are being talked about now.
Exactly.
80 years later.
Yeah, 80 years later. The other thing he did was he made sure that there was a radio in everyone's cell so people could hear radio.
Wow.
And I think if you go in the cells, you can see where the old hookup was. So, yeah, he did so many very cool contemporary things. So if Duffy's relatives are listening, please get in touch with us because we really want to highlight that book.
It should be called the San Quentin. It should be called the Warden Duffy Rehabilitation Center.
Totally.
Maybe it should be.
He's worth naming something after, for sure.
Also, I have to think, going back to the San Quentin on the air, Warden Duffy's radio show, if it was carried on 300 radio stations around the country, there have to be recordings of it somewhere.
There have to be. Oh, my goodness. I wonder if we could get in touch with, what is it, KC? I can't remember which.
KFRC, according to
KFRC.
Wikipedia, was in existence from like 1924 to 2005.
All right, we're going to start digging for that. It would
Gosh, can you imagine? What if we could find that platter, that first Glee Club recording that he was carrying all over town?
I love it. He calls it a platter.
Yeah, what? And somebody was like, Khan's on the air.
I am surprised that I remembered everything except Gregg. I mean, once he started talking, I certainly remembered his story. I have no memory of that song.
Yeah, I saw a real surprise on your face.
I wrote down, wow, I totally forgot about that song.
Oh, one other thing I'll say is that you and Erlan have gotten a lot better at narrating.
Way better.
I mean, there's a lot of this, the natural conversation, but there's some parts that you can tell are very read.
Also, our voices have a different, I don't know what register. I think we sound different now. One, we speak a lot more slowly.
Yeah,
now. I think we're much better at narrating now. I feel like we've always had a good vibe. But I think, yeah, I agree. We sound much better.
I wonder how much of the like different vibe or timbre in your voice or whatever is recording. Most of the narration we record outside now.
Yeah.
Because I feel like when you record in San Quentin, there's always like some time pressure you're under, like, well, people are being quiet. So you're like, okay, you're conscious of the guys next door not talking. So you kind of want to get it done. And you never know, like, I don't know when something else is going to happen.
Yeah. But we also have different people working with us now, which I was surprised how small the team was then. Like when we list everyone that works with us now, it's much more robust. That was a pretty small team.
Back then it was you, Antoine, and Erlan kind of full-time, and then Pat and Julie and Curtis part-time, right?
Yeah, all part-time. I think my takeaway on this is I really still like how creative this episode was and that we took a chance. It's pretty early on in our understanding of how to tell stories that we took a lot of chances with this one.
Yeah, and also I feel like I tend to maybe shy away from read passages, having somebody read something or, people forever have been telling us that we should do a story about like creative writing or something.
I know.
But there might be like more to be made out of that texture, the quality of people reading. I mean, we've had people read their letters, which is always often pretty affecting. But maybe, there's just more modes that we can probably work in. Also, Jasper is a great reader. The book is surprisingly well written for a warden in the 1940s.
It is so surprisingly well written.
Yeah.
I've read it a couple times.
Yeah.
So mine is so highlighted and marked up. Yeah. Okay, well, I'm not giving up on the idea of us recording that. And I love this exercise. It makes me want to go, it's inspiring to make me think about ways to do stories in the future.
Okay, so think more about being creative.
Yep.
Get this Warden Duffy book project done.
Yep.
And find the archives. Find this radio San Quentin on the air archives.
Yes. And then tell all these guys that were in it, what a great job they did.
I know, yeah. All right, well, thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
We'll be back soon with Erlan.
Yeah. Can't wait to hear what he says.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bruce. That was fun. You should be on the mic more. I always think that when you get on the mic.
All right. Well, maybe. We'll see.
You hear it. He just said he will.
Okay. Thanks.
Radiotopia. From